Part B, we're going to solve 5y squared plus 12y minus 1 equals 0 by completing the square. Okay, do you remember what the first step was in that recipe I gave you? Isolate the constant. So what could I do to isolate the constant? Could add 1 to both sides, right? So I get 5y squared plus 12y equals 1. And then what was the second step that wasn't relevant in the last problem, but it'll be relevant here? Divide through by the lead coefficient. What's the lead coefficient in this case? 5. So we're going to divide everything by 5. And you have to do it to the right side as well, right? To balance it out. So what does that get us? Well, 5 divided by 5 is y squared. 1y squared, that's what we were after. The best way to write 12y over 5, don't write it as 12y over 5, write it as 12/5 y so you can identify the coefficient of y. So y squared plus 12/5 y, leave a little space for completing the square, equals 1/5. Everybody with me? Okay, now we're in that step 3. So what did that step 3 say to do? Start by taking 1/2 of the coefficient of x. In this case, it's y. Square it, add it to both sides. Okay, so a little bit of scratch work here. What is the coefficient of y in this case? 12/5. How do you take 1/2 of 12/5? How do you take 1/2 of any number? Well, yeah, but when it's a fraction, it's easier to think of as multiplying by 1/2, right? Yeah, multiplying by 1/2 is the same as dividing by 2. In this case, I think it'll be easier to think of as multiplying by 1/2. I'll say that again. Multiplying by 1/2 is the same as dividing by 2. But in this case, when it's a fraction that we're taking 1/2 of, think of it as multiplying by 1/2. Okay, so then what's 1/2 of 12/5? Yeah, you can take the 2 into the 12 first and get 6/5. So that's the number I want you to write down right below this line. So write down the 6/5. That's not what we add to both sides, but I would write down plus, since it's plus right. If it were minus right here, by the way, you would put minus 6/5. Since it's plus, put plus 6/5. And then what do we do with that 6/5? Square it. Okay, so 6/5, what do you get when you square 6/5? When you take 6/5 times 6/5, what do you get? 36/25, right? You essentially square the numerator and denominator. And that's what you add to both sides, you guys. That's what step 3 says. So you're going to add 36/25 to both sides. Does that make sense to you? Yeah, don't let the fraction scare you. It's the same step as before. Now, what does y squared plus 12/5 y plus 36/25 factor to be? You might think you really need to think about this hard, right? But you don't, because you wrote down the plus 6/5 ahead of time. It always factors the same way. You take whatever the unknown is to the first power plus the guy that you already wrote down and square it. And that's how the perfect square trinomial that you created will factor every single time. That's why you write down half the coefficient, in this case of y, down below on the step below to remind you of how it factors. Okay? So you get y plus 6/5 quantity squared on the left side. What do you get on the right side? Well, 1/5 plus 36/25. What do we need to add these fractions together? Okay, so what would that common denominator be? Yeah, all we need to do then is multiply the 1/5 top and bottom by 5, and we get the 25. So we get 5/25. Keep doing that. So we get 5/25 plus 36/25. Before you solve by taking roots, you've got to simplify. So what's 5/25 plus 36/25? So 41/25. And then we have y plus 6/5. Quantity squared still on the left side. So what's the technique? You solve by taking roots. What do? Square root both sides. What do you remember in front of the square root? Plus or minus. What do you get on the left side? Y plus 6/5 quantity, or just that quantity, equals plus or minus. Okay, square root of 41/25. How do square roots split up over division and multiplication? But in this case, division. You could write the square root of 41/25 as the square root of 41 over the square root of 25, right? In other words, you can take the square root of the numerator and denominator, but what's the square root of the denominator? 5. So you get square root of 41 over just 5 plus or minus out in front. And then finally, to isolate the y, what do you do to both sides? Subtract 6/5. So you get, as an exact answer, y equals negative 6/5 plus or minus root 41 over 5. And by the way, since you have a common denominator, this answer is fine, but it's also equal to negative 6 plus or minus root 41, the whole thing over 5, because that's how we add fractions together. You combine the numerators and subtract fractions. You combine the numerators over one common denominator. Realize that's two different answers, 6 minus root 41 over 5 and 6 plus root 41 over 5. Okay?